was asked to serve as president and CEO is that I was a local guy who was going to do this job, and that was unique. But it overlooked a basic factor, which is that John Sedlak made himself a local guy. Carol mentioned referred to the 1983 referendum, which many of us lived through. And, you know, John came here with the idea he was going to build a rail system. And in 1983, a lot of people made it abundantly clear that wasn't going to happen anytime soon. And he and Kathy could have pulled up stakes right then and moved out of town and gone someplace else and done what John had on his list as #1 priority. He and Kathy chose instead to make Houston their home for the next 30 years. That's what they've done. So I think that the first thing we need to remember is this is a guy who chose Houston not just for a job, but for a life. And I think that's something that we need to thank him for, because he had many opportunities. He chose to make his opportunities here in Houston, and that to me is an important thing. John also told me the first couple of days I took the job a story that I've related before, but I'll relate it again. I did not remember this, but as the older I get, the fewer things I remember, so it all works out. That we were, back when I was a council member and John was active in Metro, there was a community meeting having to do with some project out in the, I guess, the Meyerland area. And the meeting, yes, right, and the meeting was being held along the Southwest Freeway in some place. And apparently it was one of those typically calm, cool, and collected Metro meetings where everybody's very happy with Metro. And John must have felt in fear of his life. And he swears that I sort of stood up and sort of told people to sit down and be quiet and listen to these guys and sort of helped out. And I was glad to hear that, because John did the same thing for me for the year and a half we worked together after I became president. He served as executive vice president. He pulled my chestnuts out of the fire in that short period of time more often than I care to relate. It's still a problem for me when we're in an issue to want to turn around and say, well, what did happen in 1987 on this? And John Sedlak's not there to answer the question. But it is nice to know that he is busy helping on this whole issue of high-speed rail, which is another essential need for Texas in its future. Metro has 3 priorities: first-class transit services, great transit infrastructure, and being a trusted community partner. And John has contributed to all 3. He has worried a great deal. You saw pictures of the buses up there. You saw John spent a lot of time, as Carol alluded to making sure our bus system was a great system with great equipment and great service. He also, of course, has worked on infrastructure in various forms and fashions. Carol mentioned HOV lanes. His enduring monument, of course, is the Red Line, the Main Street line, which we're now honoring him by expanding to the north and 2 lines to the east and the southeast. John made that happen. And what he learned there and what he shared with us about what he's learned has been a huge help to us as we build these new lines. And last but most importantly, John has been an emissary for us in this business of becoming a trusted community partner. When I got there, a lot of relationships around Houston had frayed, some thought irretrievably. John took on the job of being our Director of Strategic Partnering. He reached out to community after community, and I'd like to think it was our bold, brilliant strategy that sold people the idea we could be trusted, but I really know it's because John Sedlak was carrying the message. And I want to say on behalf of all 3,400 folks at Metro who miss you terribly, we thank you for the 30 years plus that you donated to this community when you could have had so many other choices. The fact that you chose us and helped us and guided us, we won't forget that. Thanks, John.
John, in working on this, we decided that you were really too damn nice to do a roast here, okay? Kathy may, I don't know, you may not, yeah, anyway. Our history really in downtown, and John runs a parallel course. John came to Houston in '83. We started Central Houston in '83, right at the time of the failed June 18, I remember the date very clearly, okay, $1 billion bond referendum that went down in flames. What's probably more frustrating about it is I guess we learned a lot of patience along the way, John, because if I remember correctly, we never stuck a shovel in the ground until 15 years later, okay, in 1998 when we broke ground for transit streets, which at the time, I'm not sure it ever really seemed like it was that long, but it was really pretty amazing. Because, as Carol said, we really pursued a strategy at Metro of a really busway system in the 80s, which, frankly, at the end of the day, we're very grateful for. I mean, it really, in many ways, it's the backbone of why downtown works today. But we came together, remember, for a referendum in 1988, which we won. And there was light rail there, and Bob Lanier, who had chaired our campaign, became the chair of Metro, and then sort of the rail seemed to kind of fade away. I think we grade separated and whatever, and Kathy Whitmire took Lanier out and put Anthony Hall in, and for a while there we were even pursuing monorail, and Bob announced that he would run for mayor, okay? And I think we know where that went, so we pursued the all-bus option, which led to transit streets, and I think, John, in downtown, that was very defining in many ways, because we touched so much of downtown and midtown, and really kind of redefining the public realm as we move forward. And then, you know, what's sort of forgotten in this, Guy Hackstadt's in the back of the room, the string maps with all the routes, and how often we sat down and said, how are we going to reroute buses and transit centers and all that. It seemed like infinite discussion we had about downtown transit centers and its location and how that would work. When Mayor Lee Brown won and decided that he would, it's time to build rail and build it fast, John really stepped forward. What I think is really fascinating is Bob Lanier said that he really supported it, and he said, I'll do anything to get it done and fast, and I think that, to me, it just blows my mind that we got it done. What's so wonderful is just the urban design that took place in that project, and took place so quickly. To really kind of shape the vision for the Red Line down to the details of the carpet you worried about. We didn't. We just sort of complained and said it better be really good, okay? And then we, the whole idea of the bricks in downtown, and then the signature square, and the idea of the water. Now, I must say this is all under Shirley when you were working for her. And the one thing that I just sort of learned about Shirley is I thought I learned a lot of four-letter words working construction as a college. And the only thing that I could say is, and I told her once, Shirley, I've learned a whole new vocabulary from you, okay? And, you know, through all of that, John seemed to remain sort of unaffected by it, you know, one way or another. Still got it done, mainly because it got it done, okay? And it opened on time on January 1, 2004. You know, it's really amazing, even though we didn't start till '98, how much really got done. I will say your patience was pretty great, because I think for me the most defining day of all of it is what I call the Thanksgiving Massacre. And I believe it took place in 2001, because I know it was Mayor Brown was running again for office. Al Haynes, you and I were summoned over to Mia Bella. We had Preston torn up, okay, you couldn't get through. You had Maine torn up. The merchants down in the historic district and restaurateurs were going absolute nuts. They had called the media out, and then on top of it, we have a gas line break, all at the same time. Okay. I've never quite decided if the break was made to order or what, but anyway, it was as always, John, I think, was his composed self, really kind of how this is all going to be better. At some point, someday, and indeed it was. But I'll never forget that day on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. But John, through it all, you really had fabulous vision. Cared a great deal about the quality of our public realm and quality of our public improvements. And more importantly, it's been so wonderful working with you on this. There are so many people in this room we've had the wonderful experience working with on the team, and Guy's at the back of the room, but I think I can speak for Guy because he worked so closely with you on so much of this at such a detailed level to get it done. But it's really been, in many ways, a wonderful career together working on all this stuff, and we're so deeply grateful for your commitment to our city.
Well, many of the projects Bob talked about, I was a part of those with the downtown transit streets, but probably don't have near as many war stories because I've only known John for about 20 years. I was 12 when I met him. I moved to Houston from the Dallas area in 1992 to restart an office for a firm that had pulled out of Houston after the bad economy of the 80s. But Metro ended up being one of our first clients. And coming from a highway and traffic engineering background. I didn't know much about Metro and probably even less about transit. But I was introduced to John by one of my mentors, Brian Bachner, and in fact, Brian was scheduled to be here, but something came up. But I remember that Brian pulled me aside, and we had called John's assistant, Dean Moses, to set the meeting, and Brian told me, he said, "You're going to meet the ultimate professional." And that's something that really stood out, because I had a lot of respect for Brian Bachner, and here he was telling me that I was going to meet the ultimate professional. And I think we can all testify that over the years, John proved that time and time again. I really enjoyed working with Metro. It was a pleasure. And one of the things I most appreciated about John was that the relationship between Metro and the consultants. John always saw that as a true partnership and fostered that, and so it really made for a great working relationship, and John, I always appreciate that, and appreciate working with Metro. Although many of our projects were focused on bringing rail to Houston, one of the things John always reminded us of was the importance of Metro's bus system. One that he always said that it was one of the best bus systems in the country. And so, John, I would just like to say thank you for allowing me to be a small part of your outstanding career in Houston and improving the mobility and lives of the citizens.
Thank you.
Well, I'm going to bring a little different perspective. First, just so you know where I'm coming from, I'm going to say that John is a big man, but as a client, he's huge in a good way. You saw a lot of the projects that were in the screen over there, and that was largely to his willingness and cooperation and instigation for these things to happen. I'm an architect, urban designer, and prior to John's coming to Houston, Metro as a transit agency was focused on developing a great transit facility, and they were focused mostly in the engineering aspects of, as I say. Now, due to John's background, he's an architect and urban designer by training. He recognized that the vertical elements of a transit system were really significant, impactful pieces that affected the environment of the city. I guess this is on, right? Through his support and through his urging, things began to happen, and things began to change in how the public began to see what the transit authority was doing. He recognized that these were transit corridors, whether they be bus or rail or whatever. At the early parts, there was no rail. There were fingers that affected the neighborhoods, affected quality of life, and so forth. And he realized that, and he was sensitive to the fact that these were public buildings that sort of speak about what a city thinks about itself and the image that it has. Prior to John's sort of leading the staff that was directing the construction of these things, there were sort of prototypes of transit centers and park and rides. They were all space frames, and one system fit everything. And he recognized that we needed to be respectful of